Hayden greeted me with a gray shroud of rain and the smell of wet asphalt. I pulled my tattered travel bag out of the trunk of the cab and cringed at the pain in my back. 2 months in the hospital hadn't gone to waste. I seemed to be getting older, though not much further at 68. "Can I help you, sir?" The driver, a guy in his 20s, looked at me sympathetically. "I'll be fine," I mumbled, paying the bill. "I'm not that much of a wreck." I stood on the sidewalk and looked at my son's house. It was 2 stories high, with a white picket fence and a neat lawn, just like those happy family life commercials on TV. Only I know what rottenness sometimes hides behind perfect facades. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe things have changed for the better in the 2 months I've been away. There was a brand new red car in the driveway. I don't know about makes, but even I knew it wasn't cheap. The last time I'd been here, Winnie had driven a used Toyota that she and Trenton had bought on an installment plan. I wonder where the money came from. Working at the post office doesn't bring in that kind of income. I know that. I walked slowly back to the house, trying not to wrinkle my nose at the pulling pain in my lower back. I used to visit my son every Sunday, but then I had that damn heart attack. And instead of the usual visits, I was confined to a hospital bed. The door opened before I even rang the bell. There she was, my little Tilly, with eyes like 2 blue lakes, just like her late mother's. Now there was disbelief and joy in those eyes. "Grandpa Merrick." "Sorry." She threw herself around my neck, and for a second I forgot about the pain in my back as I held that fragile body close to me. "Hello, Fishy," I whispered, using my old nickname for her. "How you've grown." Actually, Tilly hadn't grown. On the contrary, she seemed even smaller than I remembered her. Skinny, pale, with thin wrists sticking out of the sleeves of a sweatshirt that was clearly too big for her. "Daddy said you weren't coming for a long time," she whispered in my ear, still not letting go. "I missed you so much." "Me too, baby. I missed you so much." "Dad? Who's there?" Trenton's voice came from the back of the house, and then he showed up. "Dad? You didn't tell me you were coming." Trenton looked both surprised and worried, like my arrival was interfering with something he'd planned. "I thought it would be a surprise," I replied, gently lowering Tilly to the floor. "The doctors finally released me. They said I'm a tough old man, and I'll live." That's great," Trenton smiled strainedly. "Come on in. Winnie will be glad to see you." I doubted it, but I kept silent. Inside, the house had changed. Instead of the familiar worn furniture, there was a new leather couch, a glass coffee table, and a huge TV on the wall. There was a piano in the corner of the living room. As far as I could remember, neither Trenton nor Winnie could play. "Wow," I couldn't help myself. "Did you guys win the lottery?" "Just a little update." Trenton shrugged, avoiding my eyes. Winnie had been wanting a change of scenery for a long time. "And the new car was part of the upgrade too?" "Yeah, Winnie got a pay raise, and we decided to—" "Trenton, you didn't tell me we had company." Winnie came into the room like a queen at a ball. She looked flawless. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, new dress. Only her eyes remained cold. "Merrick, what a surprise!" She came up and hugged me, a wave of luscious perfume wafting over me. "We weren't expecting you so soon. Trenton said you needed at least another month of rehabilitation." "I recover quickly," I replied. "Besides, I miss my granddaughter." Winnie's smile became even more strained. "Of course. Tilly missed her too. Didn't she, sweetie?" Tilly nodded silently, not looking up. Something about her had changed in those 2 months. It was like she'd shrunk, smaller and quieter. "Where are Rosie and Garrett?" I asked about Winnie's children from her first marriage. "In extracurricular activities," Winnie answered proudly. "Rosie is practicing ballet, and Garrett is practicing tennis. You have to develop talents from childhood." I looked at Tilly and wanted to ask what talents she was developing, but I held back. "She'll get over it." "Are you staying for dinner?" Winnie asked, looking like she was doing me a favor. "Actually, I was thinking of staying a few days, if you don't mind. The doctors say it's better if I don't live alone for a while." Annoyance flashed across Winnie's face, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Of course we don't mind. Right, Trenton? Tilly, show Grandpa the guest room." Tilly took my hand and led me upstairs. Her little fingers were cold, and I involuntarily squeezed them tighter. The guest room was the only place in the house that hadn't changed. The same narrow bed, the same old dresser, the same faded curtains. I dusted here almost every day, Tilly said quietly when we were alone. I knew you'd come back. That simple admission pricked my heart. Thanks, Fish. I knew I could count on you. She smiled weakly and sat down on the edge of the bed, chattering her feet in worn sneakers that were clearly too small for her. I cautiously sat down next to her. How are you doing at school? I'm okay. I learned how to read difficult words. Good for you. How's home? Do you like living here? Tilly hesitated, her little face tense. It's fine, she said, repeating the same answer. Only sometimes it can be complicated. Complicated? What do you mean? She shrugged and stared at the floor. It's just Rosie and Garrett. They say I'm not a real sister, and that this is their house, not mine. I felt anger boiling up inside me, but I tried not to show it. That's not true, Tilly. It's your daddy's house, which means it's yours too. But Daddy always agrees with Winnie, she whispered. And Winnie says I'm... Tilly! Winnie's sharp voice interrupted our conversation. Come and help me in the kitchen. Tilly shuddered and jumped off the bed. I'll go, Grandpa. Get some rest. And she slipped out of the room before I could say anything. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Something was wrong here. Something rotten and wrong. I remembered what Trenton had been like before he married Winnie Strong. Funny, opinionated. Then he'd already had Tilly from his first marriage to Laura, whom he'd loved to bits. When Laura died of cancer, Trenton was crushed. And then there was Winnie. Strong, determined, knows what she wants. I hated her from the start, but I kept quiet. I figured my son had a right to be happy after such a loss. And now there was another person in front of me. Weak, hesitant, always looking back at his wife. Trenton was always a little insecure, but not to this extent. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I'd pushed him too hard as a kid, been too strict, and now he was looking for approval from the bossy woman who'd replaced his strict father. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and children's voices. Mommy, look what I drew in class, shouted a girl I recognized by her voice. Rosie, Winnie's eldest daughter. Wait, honey, I'm busy, Winnie answered in a different tone. Soft, loving. You can show me at dinner. When is dinner? I'm hungry, said Garrett, the youngest. Soon, darling. Tilly's just helping me cook. I got up and walked out of the room, trying not to make any noise. I stopped at the top of the stairs where I could see the entire first floor. Rosie and Garrett were sitting on the new leather couch in front of the TV. Rosie was a blonde-haired girl in a pink dress with bows, Garrett a stocky boy in an expensive tracksuit. Both looked well-groomed and content with life. In the kitchen, Tilly stood on a small stool by the stove, stirring something in a pot. Careful, don't spill it, Winnie commanded, and don't forget to wash the dishes afterward. Yes, Winnie, Tilly answered quietly. I saw the picture as if from the outside, a little girl at the stove, doing an adult's job, while her half-brother and sister relaxed in front of the TV, and my son, who sits in a chair and pretends to read the newspaper, ignoring what's going on. Suddenly, Tilly staggers on her stool, and some sauce spills out of the pot onto the stove. What have you done? Winnie instantly turned to shouting. I told you to be careful. Now we're going to have to scrub it all up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Tilly shrank even smaller. You can never do anything right, Winnie continued. You've got grease stains all over the kitchen. Winnie, Trenton said softly. She didn't do it on purpose. Are you defending her like you always do? Winnie turned sharply toward him. She must learn responsibility. Trenton stared at the paper again, not saying a word. I gripped the stair railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to go down and say what I thought about the situation, but years of working on the railroad had taught me one important thing. First observe, then act. Haste is only good for catching fleas. So I quietly went back to my room, sat down on my bed and began to think. Something was going on here, something wrong, and I intended to find out what it was before I took any action. By dinner time, I came downstairs with a smile on my face and an unwavering resolve to figure things out. The first morning at my son's house began with a commotion. Through my sleep, I could hear Winnie commanding the gathering of the children for school. Her voice would rise to a shrill note or fall to a sweet coo, depending on who she was addressing. When I finally came down to breakfast, only Tilly and Trenton were in the kitchen. "Good morning," I said, watching my granddaughter hurriedly eat her oatmeal. "Hi, Dad." Trenton looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "Coffee? I'll have some." I sat down next to Tilly and ruffled her hair. She smiled weakly, not looking up from her plate. "How did you sleep, Fish?" "Good," she replied quietly. "Winnie already dropped Rosie and Garrett off at school," Trenton said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. "I have to go to work. Tilly, don't be late for the bus." "I can take her," I offered. There's nothing to do anyway." Trenton looked at his daughter hesitantly. "Well, if you don't mind, just don't overexert yourself, okay? You need to take care of your heart." "My heart is stronger than it looks," I grinned, "and a walk will do me good." When Trenton left, Tilly and I were alone. She finished her oatmeal quickly and carried it to the sink, standing on tiptoe to reach the faucet. "So, let me help you." I walked over and turned on the water. "Thank you." She did the dishes diligently. "Winnie says I should clean up after myself." "That's right," I agreed. "But why don't your brother and sister do the same?" Tilly shrugged her shoulders. "They're not my real brother and sister, and they have a lot of important things to do." There was no offense in her voice, just a statement of fact, and that made it even harder. When we got outside, the morning air was fresh and cool. Tilly held my hand tightly, talking about her class and her teacher who sometimes gives her extra books because Tilly reads the best. I listened and thought about how little I really knew about this little girl's life. "What school do you go to?" I asked, remembering that Rosie and Garrett went to a private school. "Regular," Tilly answered. "The one near the park." "Why not the same one as Rosie and Garrett?" She shrugged again. "Winnie says I don't need a special education, that I'm not that capable." I felt the anger boiling up inside again. Every month I'd given Trenton money for Tilly's education, and now it turned out it was being spent on something else. "That's not true," I said, trying to speak calmly. "You're a very smart girl." "Maybe," she didn't look convinced. "But Rosie and Garrett go to a school with a pool and music classes. All we have is the old playground." We approached the school, a typical public school with cracked asphalt and faded paint on the walls. Not at all what I had envisioned when I sent the money. "I'll see you after school," Tilly said, releasing my hand. Will you come get me?" "Sure, Fishy. What time?" 3 o'clock. Just..." She hesitated. "Don't tell Winnie you're picking me up. She doesn't usually come. I go home by myself." "A 6-year-old girl coming home from school by herself?" I frowned. "I'm almost 7, Tilly said seriously. "And it's not far, really." I nodded, not wanting to argue, but determined that I would meet her every day while I was here. Left alone, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Hayden was a small town where everyone knew each other, but I rarely interacted with my son's neighbors. Now, however, I wanted to learn more about how this family lived when I wasn't around. I was walking slowly down the street, looking at the houses and wondering where to start, when I noticed an elderly woman trimming roses in the front garden across the street from Trenton's house. She looked like a typical neighbor who sees everything and knows everything. "Good morning," I said hello, stepping closer. She lifted her head, squinting against the sun. "Morning. You're Trenton's father, right? Saw you arrive yesterday." "That's right, Merrick Flint." I held out my hand. "And you are?" "Elspeth Caldwell." She took off her gardening glove and shook my hand. "I've lived here for 30 years. I've seen your son grow up and have a family of his own." Then you must know them well." "Well enough," she went back to the roses, but I sensed she didn't mind talking. "How is your health? I heard you were having heart trouble." "Getting better, thank you." I sat down on the bench next to her garden. "You know, I haven't been here in 2 months, and things seem to have changed." "Yeah, Trenton and his wife have settled in quite nicely," she said, a faint note of disapproval in her voice. "New car, new furniture. I hear they're even thinking about a pool in the backyard." "I didn't know the post office paid so well," I said casually. Elspeth grinned. "Not so much at the post office, but Winnie's just taken over as manager of the cab dispatch office, and that's a different kind of money. Besides," she lowered her voice, "as far as I know, you're helping them financially too." "For Tilly's education," I clarified. Elspeth straightened and gave me a long look. "Is that so? That's interesting. What is it?" She took off the other glove and sat down beside me. Minus Mr. Flint, I'm not a fan of gossip, but as long as the child's welfare is at stake, Tilly goes to a regular school, while Winnie's children attend Bridgewood Academy, the most expensive private school in the county. I nodded, already knowing this from Tilly. And how often do you see Winnie picking Tilly up from school? Almost never, Elspeth shook her head. The girl usually comes back alone. Sometimes when the weather's bad, Trenton picks her up after work. But that's rare. And Rosie and Garrett? Oh, they get picked up every day. Then Winnie, then the nanny who comes to help around the house. A nanny? I didn't know they had a nanny. What does she do? She mostly takes care of Winnie's kids, takes them to class, helps with homework. I've never seen her pay any attention to Tilly. I've been slowly digesting this information, and I don't like it at all. You know, Mr. Flint, Elspeth lowered her voice even more. I don't mean to speak ill of your sister-in-law, but sometimes I hear her talking to Tilly, and that's not the way to talk to a child. What do you mean? Harsh, rough, like the girl's not a member of the family, but, a servant. I remembered the scene in the kitchen last night and nodded grimly. And Trenton, what does he do when that happens? Elspeth shrugged. Trenton's a good man, but weak. He lets his wife run everything, even his relationship with his daughter. We talked some more, and I learned that the family's financial situation had improved markedly in recent months. There was not only a new car and furniture, but also expensive clothes, jewelry for Winnie, and gadgets for the kids. At the same time, Tilly, according to Elspeth, always wore the same shabby clothes. I don't mean to pry, Elspeth said, but if you ask my opinion, that girl is being treated unfairly, and if I were you, I'd take a closer look. I thanked her for the conversation and walked back to my son's house, feeling my anxiety growing with every step. At home, I found the nanny, a young woman named Cassidy, vacuuming the living room. She seemed surprised to see me. You must be Trenton's father, she said, turning off the vacuum cleaner. Winnie mentioned that you'd be staying with them. Yeah, for a few days, I looked around the perfectly clean room. Do you work here every day? 3 times a week, she answered. I mostly tutor Rosie and Garrett after school and help with the cleaning. And with Tilly? Cassidy looked confused. Winnie said Tilly doesn't need any extra help. Prefers to tutor her stepdaughter herself. I doubted that, but I didn't press the girl. Instead, I spent the rest of the day exploring the house and its surroundings, trying to piece together a picture of my granddaughter's life. At 3 o'clock, I waited outside the school. Tilly was one of the last to come out, looking tired, but visibly perked up when she saw me. You made it! She ran up and hugged me. I promised. I took her hand. How was your day? It was fine, she shrugged. We learned multiplication. Was it hard? Not really. I like math. On the way home, we stopped at the park. Tilly looked uncertainly at the swings. May I? Sure, fishy. We have plenty of time. She climbed onto the swing, and I gently began to rock her. Tilly laughed, throwing her head back, and in those moments she looked so much like her mother that my heart sank. When she swung high enough, the sleeve of her sweatshirt pulled up, and I noticed a small but distinct bluish-yellow bruise on her forearm. Tilly. I waited for the swing to slow down. How did you get that bruise? She lowered her sleeve, momentarily stopping smiling. I fell. You fell? Where? On the stairs. At school. I sensed she was lying, but I didn't press. Instead, I gently took her other arm and rolled up her sleeve, revealing 2 more bruises, less obvious but still recognizable. Were those from the fall too? Tilly looked frightened. Yeah, sometimes clumsy. Tilly, I sat down in front of her, looking her straight in the eye. You can trust me. If someone hurts you, I need to know. She looked away. No one's hurting me. I'm just falling. Inigda. I bump into things. What kind of things? All sorts of things. She looked more and more tense. Grandpa, can we not talk about this anymore? Please? I could see that it was useless to ask further. She had shut down like a shell. So I just nodded and offered to buy some ice cream before coming home. Tilly was relieved to agree. When we got back, Winnie was already home and didn't look pleased. Where have you been? she asked, looking at Tilly. You were supposed to go straight home after school. I was the one who suggested a walk, I interjected. I wanted to spend time with my granddaughter. Tilly knows the rules, Winnie replied coldly. Amahara, she has to go straight back and do her homework. I'll do it all, Tilly said quietly. We haven't got much to assign. Then go and do it, Winnie pointed upstairs. And remember, you have to help with dinner afterward. Tilly obediently went to the stairs. I wanted to follow her, but Winnie stopped me. Merrick, I realize you miss your granddaughter, but we have a certain routine. Tilly needs discipline. Discipline or tyranny? I couldn't help myself. Winnie raised her eyebrows. I beg your pardon? Nothing, I shook my head. I just think a 6-year-old could use a little fun after school. Tilly needs to learn responsibility, Winnie cut in. Unlike Rosie and Garrett, she has no natural talents. She'll have to rely on hard work. I struggled to hold back my angry rebuke. Instead, I decided to come at it from a different angle. Speaking of talents, I noticed that Rosie and Garrett go to a private school. Bridgewood Academy, Winnie confirmed proudly. The best in the neighborhood. Why does Tilly go to a regular school? Winnie tensed a little. We thought she'd be more comfortable there. Bridgewood has very high standards that not every child can meet. Sharonenum, but I send money every month for her education, I said. Enough to pay for Bridgewood. Trenton thought it would be better to spread the money over all the children. Winnie looked increasingly uncomfortable. After all, they're all your grandchildren. Rosie and Garrett are not my grandchildren, I said firmly, and the money was specifically for Tilly's education. Winnie pressed her lips together. Oh no, I think you'd better discuss it with Trenton. I will, I promised. That evening, when the kids were asleep, I finally found my son alone. He was sitting on the back porch with a bottle of beer, staring out into the darkness of the garden. Mind if I join you? I asked. Trenton nodded to a nearby chair. Help yourself. He pointed to the cooler of drinks next to him. Just don't tell the doctors. I pulled out a bottle and sat down next to him. We were silent for a while. Then I decided to start from afar. Remember when you and I used to go fishing when you were little? Trenton smiled weakly. Sure do. You always said patience was the most important quality in a fisherman. And of men in general, I added. But there's a difference between patience and inaction. Trenton tensed, obviously sensing where I was going with this. What's your point, Dad? What's going on in your house? I said bluntly. With your daughter. Tilly's fine, he answered quickly. Is she? Then why does she have bruises on her arms? Why does she wear shabby clothes while Winnie's kids are dressed to the nines? Why does she clean and cook while they watch TV? Trenton stared into his bottle. You're dramatizing everything. Winnie's just teaching her independence. Shortoam, are bruises part of the training? She's just clumsy, Trenton shrugged, but didn't meet my gaze. All kids fall. Don't lie to me, son. I put my hand on his shoulder. I see what's going on here. Tilly isn't a family member, she's a servant. And you're the one letting it happen. Trenton raised his head sharply. What do you want me to do? For me to get a divorce? Break up the family? I want you to protect your daughter, I said firmly. And I want to know why the money I was sending for her education went to a private school for Winnie's kids. Trenton looked ashamed. It was Winnie's idea. She said it would be fair if all the kids got the same opportunities. But they don't get the same opportunities, I objected. Nakurnin. Rosie and Garrett are in expensive schools, tutoring, taking extra classes. And Tilly? What does she have? She has a family, Trenton replied weakly. After Laura died, I thought I'd never be able to give her a proper family. Winnie, she can be strict, but she takes care of Tilly in her own way. Making her work like a maid? Humiliating her in front of her half-brother and sister? Trenton looked increasingly uncomfortable. You don't understand. Winnie does so much for us. She organizes everything, solves all the problems. Sometimes she can be abrupt, but she does it with the best of intentions. I shook my head, feeling disappointed. Son, I don't recognize you. What happened to the man who was willing to move mountains for his daughter? I still love Tilly, Trenton said. It's hard to balance everybody. Winnie thinks that if we spoil Tilly too much, it'll turn Rosie and Garrett against her. We need everyone to feel equal. But they're not, I objected. Not in this house. Trenton finished his beer and set the bottle on the floor. Dad, I'm asking you to stay out of this. You'll stay a few days, and then you'll be gone, and we'll live here. Winnie's already unhappy with the way you're spending time with Tilly. If you start confronting her, it'll only make things worse. Worse for who? For you? Or for Tilly? Everyone, Trenton said firmly. Please, Dad, I know what I'm doing. Winnie's not perfect, but she's a good mom. And she cares about Tilly, just in her own way. I looked at my son and saw the pleading in his eyes. Did he really believe what he was saying? Or did he just convince himself because it was easier? Okay, I finally said. I'll stay out of it. For now. Trenton exhaled with relief. Thanks, Dad. But I want the money I send to go to Tilly, I added. If I find out it's being spent on something else again, I'll stop helping. I'll talk to Winnie, Trenton promised. We'll work something out. I nodded, but inside I felt like this conversation wasn't going to change anything. Trenton was too weak to stand up to his wife, and Winnie had him too firmly under her thumb. When I got back to my room, I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about Tilly and her bruises, the way she'd cringed when I'd asked about them. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't yet realize what. But one thing I knew for sure, I wouldn't leave my granddaughter in trouble. The next day, Trenton suggested I come home, supposedly for my own good. He said that I needed to rest after the hospital, that the hustle and bustle of a house with 3 kids was hardly conducive to recovery. I pretended to agree, but decided not to leave Hayden. Instead, I rented a room in a small guest house on the outskirts of town, far enough away from my son's house that I wouldn't accidentally bump into each other, but close enough to keep my hand in. For a week, I watched from afar. Each day, I walked Tilly to school and met her afterward. Then she would go home and I would return to my boarding house. We had agreed to keep our meetings a secret. I didn't like the little lies, but I could see Tilly blossoming in my company, and I didn't want to deprive her of those moments of joy. She told me about school, about the books she was reading, about her teacher. Sometimes she mentioned her home life, but sparingly, as if she were afraid to say too much. I didn't press her, waiting for her to open up. The bruises on her arms were gradually getting paler. No new ones seemed to appear, and that gave me some comfort. On Friday, Tilly told me that tomorrow was Garrett's birthday. He was turning 8. It's going to be a big party, she said as we walked home from school. With a clown and a wizard, and lots of kids are coming. That sounds great, I said. Are you excited? Tilly shrugged her shoulders. I guess I am. Only it's not my party. Winnie said I should help because I'm a big girl and Rosie's still a baby. Rosie's 9 and you're 6, I reminded her. How little is she? I don't know, Tilly looked confused. But Winnie said Rosie would greet the guests because she's pretty and well-mannered, and I'd help in the kitchen. I felt the anger boiling up inside me again, but I tried not to show it. Would you like to celebrate with everyone? Yes, she admitted quietly. There'll be chocolate cake, and ice cream, and presents. Will you get a present? Tilly shook her head. It's not my birthday. Mine's in 3 months. Maybe then. She didn't finish the sentence, and the look of hopelessness on her little face hurt. I squeezed her hand a little tighter. You know what? I have an idea. Why don't I come to the party tomorrow as a guest, and I'll bring a present for Garrett, like I'm supposed to, and a little one for you? What do you say? Tilly's eyes widened with surprise and delight. Really, will you come? Of course I am, if you want to. I do, she jumped for joy. But, her face got serious again. Winnie might get angry. She thinks you've gone home. Don't worry about it, I reassured her. I'll explain everything. After all, I'm Garrett's grandfather, aren't I? I winked at her, and Tilly giggled, catching my irony. You're not his real grandfather, she said, repeating the same phrase she'd often heard about herself. But come anyway. The party starts at 2 o'clock. I nodded and decided that I would come, not only for Tilly's sake, but also to see for myself how she was treated at family gatherings. The next day, I bought Garrett a present, a young chemist's kit, which boys his age usually love. For Tilly, I chose a small but beautifully illustrated book of fairy tales. I had noticed that she loved to read. I wrapped the book in brightly colored paper and hid it in my jacket pocket. I decided to give it discreetly so as not to raise any questions. At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood in front of my son's house. Children's voices and music were coming from the open windows. Several cars were parked in the driveway, and from time to time adults and children came out of the doors, carrying colorfully wrapped gifts. I took a deep breath and pressed the bell. Rosie opened the door, with bows in her hair, in a lush pink dress, looking like a doll from an expensive store window. "Hello," she said in a practiced, polite tone. "Dasha Winnie. Welcome to Garrett's birthday party." Then she looked at me and blinked in surprise. "Oh, you're Grandpa Tilly, aren't you? Mom said you were away." "I came back especially for the party," I smiled. "May I come in?" Rosie nodded uncertainly and stepped aside. I entered the house and was immediately immersed in the noise of the children's party. The living room was decorated with balloons and garlands, with a table of treats in the center, and children crowded around it. Garrett, dressed like a little gentleman, was the center of attention, showing his friends some new toy. Trenton noticed me first. He was just pouring juice into plastic cups and almost spilled it in surprise. Dad? What are you doing here?" "Confronting. I came to wish my grandson a happy birthday." I handed him a present. "I hope that's not a problem." "No, of course not." Trenton looked confused. "We just thought you'd be home by now." "Decided to stick around in Hayden." I looked around. "Where's Tilly?" "In the kitchen helping Winnie," Trenton answered, and I could see him avoiding my gaze. "Look, Dad, let's not make a scene today, okay? It's a big day for Garrett." I'm just here to celebrate," I shrugged. "No scenes." I walked through the living room, greeted Garrett, who barely paid attention to me, preoccupied with his presence, and moved stealthily toward the kitchen. There were voices coming from there, a shrill Winnie and a quiet Tilly. The kitchen was chaos. Dirty dishes in the sink, leftovers on the table, and scattered food wrappers. In the midst of it all stood Tilly, wearing an old apron tied double-knotted in the back so it wouldn't fall off her skinny body. She stood on a stool by the sink and washed dishes while Winnie scurried around the kitchen, preparing a new batch of appetizers. "Hurry up, Tilly," she commanded. "The guests are waiting for clean plates for the cake." "I'm trying," the girl replied quietly, struggling to handle the large dish. Winnie turned to her and snatched the plate from her hands. "Why are you such a pussy? Rosie was doing much better at your age." I stood in the doorway watching the scene, and I could feel the anger building up inside. Tilly saw me and smiled weakly, but immediately lowered her head, as if she was afraid her joy would be noticed. "Do you need help?" I asked, entering the kitchen. Winnie turned around sharply, her face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Merrick, what are you doing here?" "I came to Garrett's birthday party," I answered, walking over to Tilly, "and I guess I should have gotten here sooner." I helped my granddaughter down from her chair and turned to Winnie. "Why is she working while everyone else is having fun?" Winnie gave me a strained smile. "Tilly's just helping me. She volunteered herself." I looked at Tilly. She stood with her head down and was silent. "Is that true, Fishy? You wanted to skip the party and do the dishes all by yourself?" Tilly looked up at me, her eyes full of confusion. She obviously didn't know whether to tell the truth and incur Winnie's wrath or lie to Grandpa. "Yeah, I wanted to help," she finally said quietly. "You see?" Winnie said triumphantly. "Tilly is a very responsible girl, not like some people. Where's the babysitter?" "Shinonaka," I asked. "Shouldn't she be helping with the cooking and cleaning?" "Cassidy's off today," Winnie said. "Look, Merrick, I appreciate your concern, but this is not the time to get into a fight. We're having a party, and the guests are waiting." "Exactly," I nodded. "A party. For all the children in this house." I took Tilly's hand. "Come on, Fishy. It's time to have some fun." "But I'm not finished with the dishes," Tilly said uncertainly. "That's all right. The grown-ups can do it themselves." Winnie blocked our way. "Merrick, I won't let you interfere with the children's upbringing. Tilly has to finish her chores." "Duties?" I felt my anger boiling up inside me. "She's 6 years old. What the hell are chores?" "Don't raise your voice at me in my house," Winnie hissed. "If you can't behave, you'd better leave." At that moment, Rosie and Garrett came into the kitchen. "Mom, when is the cake coming?" Garrett asked. Then he spotted me and Tilly and said mockingly, "Has the maid been let out of the kitchen yet?" Rosie giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Tilly's maid," she said in a teasing tone. I felt Tilly squirm next to me, and that was the last straw. "Is that how you're raising her?" I turned to Winnie. Teaching your kids to bully their little sister? Yummy, huh? Don't be so dramatic, Winnie said. The kids are just kidding around. It's not joking, I countered. It's bullying, and you're encouraging it. I turned to Rosie and Garrett. Tilly is your sister, not your maid, and she needs respect, not ridicule. She's not our real sister, Rosie said firmly. Mom said that Garrett and I were a real family, and Tilly was just living with us because her mom was dead. I looked at Winnie, who didn't even try to refute her daughter's words. Is that how you talk about your husband's daughter? Indoctrinate your children that she is a stranger? At that moment, Trenton entered the kitchen, attracted by the noise. What's going on in here? He asked, looking around at everyone. Your father is interfering with your children's upbringing, Winnie said. He wants Tilly to drop her chores and go out and have fun. Duties? I turned to my son. Do you see what your daughter is doing while everyone is celebrating? Do you hear your stepchildren calling her a maid? Trenton looked confused and guilty at the same time. Dad, now's not the time. We got company. Exactly, Winnie said. And we need to get back to the party. Tilly, finish the dishes, and you can join everyone when we cut the cake. No, I said firmly. Tilly is coming with me. Right now. I took my granddaughter by the hand and headed for the exit. Winnie grabbed the girl's other hand. She's not going anywhere without her parents' permission. Tilly was between us, looking fearfully at Winnie and me. Let her go, I demanded. You have no right to tell me what to do in my house, Winnie snapped at me. Trenton, I turned to my son. Say something. This is your daughter, damn it. Trenton shifted his gaze from me to his wife, clearly not knowing which side to take. Winnie, why don't you let Tilly really go to the party? He finally said hesitantly. It's a special day. Don't you dare indulge him. Winnie raised her voice. He's already gone home. He shouldn't be here. He's trying to destroy our family. I'm trying to protect my granddaughter, I countered. From you and your spoiled children. How dare you? Winnie turned red with anger. My children are just getting what they deserve. And Tilly, what does she deserve? Bruises? Humiliation? Worn clothes? Trenton went pale. Bruises? What are you talking about, Dad? I rolled up Tilly's sleeve, showing the pale but still visible bruises. That. And don't tell me she just falls over. 6-year-olds don't fall that often and in the wrong places. Winnie finally let go of Tilly's hand and crossed her arms over her chest. Are you accusing me of child abuse? That's a serious allegation, Merrick. I'm telling you what I see, I replied, and I don't like what I see. Dad, Trenton stepped forward. You've got it all wrong. Winnie is strict but fair. She's a good mother. To her kids, maybe, I agreed, but not to Tilly. I turned to my granddaughter, who stood with her head down, clearly frightened by the scene. Tilly, do you want to stay here or come with me? She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, and whispered, With you, Grandpa. She's not going anywhere. Winnie cut her off. Trenton, tell your father to get out of our house. Now! Trenton looked completely lost. He looked from his wife to his father, not knowing what to do. Dad, please, he finally said. Let's not spoil the party. Come back tomorrow and we'll discuss everything calmly. I looked at my son with disappointment. You're choosing her side? Even now when you see how your daughter is being treated? I'm not choosing sides, Trenton defended himself. I just want tonight to go well. For Garrett's sake. For Garrett's sake, I repeated. What about Tilly? Is anyone thinking about what's best for her? I turned to Winnie. You know what? I'm really going to leave. But first, I want to make one thing clear. As of this moment, I'm cutting off all financial assistance to this family. Winnie went pale. What? You heard me. Not a dime more. And what's more, I'm changing my will. All my assets will go into a trust for Tilly to use when she comes of age. Neither you nor your children will get anything. You can't do that, Winnie exclaimed. It's not fair to Rosie and Garrett. Fair? I grinned bitterly. You dare talk about fairness when you make a 6-year-old girl work as a maid at her stepbrother's birthday party? When you spend the money meant for her education on your children? When you let them humiliate her and call her a maid? I turned to Trenton. And you? You let it all happen. You betray your daughter and her mother's memory for, what? An easy marriage? An easy life? It's not fair, Dad. Trenton looked hurt. I love Tilly. Then prove it, I said. Take her side, just once. Trenton was silent, avoiding my gaze. Winnie took advantage of the pause. Trenton, tell your father to leave. Now he's ruining Garrett's party. To my disappointment, but not surprise, Trenton nodded. Dad, please, go away. I looked at my son for a long moment. What happened to you, Trenton? Where did the man I raised go? I grew up, Dad, he answered quietly. I got my own family, my own decisions. And my own priorities, I added. I hope you can live with them. I turned to Tilly and crouched down in front of her. I'm sorry, Fishy. I wanted you to have fun today. It's okay, Grandpa, she whispered. I'm used to it. Those simple words broke my heart. A 6-year-old should not have to get used to injustice and humiliation. I took a small package out of my pocket and placed it discreetly in her hand. This is for you. Hide it and look at it when you're alone. Tilly quickly slipped the gift into her apron pocket and nodded. I straightened up and looked at Winnie one last time. I'm going to keep an eye on what's going on in this house. And if I find out that Tilly is suffering again, I will take action. Trust me. Is that a threat? Winnie squinted at me. It's a promise, I replied and headed for the exit. Walking through the living room full of cheerful children and chattering adults, I felt like an outsider. My own son had chosen a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth, had chosen his wife's favor over his daughter's well-being. But I wasn't about to give up. Once outside, I was determined that I would do whatever it took to protect Tilly, even if it meant destroying the fragile peace that Trenton had built. As I walked away from the house, the sound of children's laughter and music reached me. The festivities continued. Just not for everyone. Monday morning, I sat in the office of Audrey Pembroke, the best family law attorney in Hayden. A middle-aged woman with a short haircut and a discerning eye listened intently to my story, occasionally making notes in her notebook. So, Mr. Flint, she said when I was finished, you want to change your will and consider getting custody of your granddaughter. Am I understanding that correctly? Absolutely, I nodded. Right now. There won't be a problem with the will. Audrey tapped her pen on the table. It's your property and you have the right to use it as you see fit. Custody is a little more complicated. Why? I frowned. Isn't what I've told you serious enough? It is, she agreed. But we need proof. The bruises you saw could have come from a fall, as your sister-in-law claims. The neighbor's testimony and your own observations are important, but courts are usually reluctant to remove children from a family unless there are clear signs of physical abuse or extreme neglect. You mean you have to wait until the child is maimed? I was indignant. No, of course not, Audrey shook her head. But we need to gather more information. Talk to Tilly's teachers, possibly the doctor who examined her. Do a home assessment through social services. Will that take a long time? A few weeks, maybe months. Bureaucracy is unfortunately slow in these cases. I sighed heavily. Months. And Tilly would have to stay in that house the whole time. Are there any other options? I asked. Something quicker? Audrey thought for a moment. Sometimes just the threat of a lawsuit helps in these situations. If your son and his wife realize that you're serious and willing to go all the way, they might compromise. Like what? Like letting Tilly spend more time with you. Weekends, vacations. It's not a perfect solution, but it might improve the girl's situation while we work on a more permanent option. I thought about what she said. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was better than nothing. Okay, I finally said. Let's start with the will, and then we'll deal with the guardianship issue. Audrey nodded and pulled some forms out of a desk drawer. Fill these out, and we'll get right on with your will. As for the guardianship, I'll start gathering information and prepare the papers to file with the court. Even if we don't file them right away, the mere fact that they exist can be good leverage. I spent the next 2 hours filling out paperwork and discussing the details of the new will. My estate wasn't that big a house on the outskirts of Hayden, an old car, some savings, and a pension from the railroad. But it could have been a good start to adulthood for Tilly, money for education, for a first home. All savings and assets go into a trust fund, I dictated while Audrey typed. Tilly would be able to use it when she turned 18. Until then, the fund will be administered by, I wondered, can you be the trustee? Of course, Audrey nodded, but usually people appoint someone close to them. I don't have anyone close to Tilly, I said sadly, except my brother Finley, but he lives in Oregon and he's too old. Then I can take on that role, Audrey agreed. But you'll need to appoint another person in case of unforeseen circumstances. We both knew what she meant. At my age, contingency usually meant one thing. Finley will do, I decided. He wouldn't be able to participate actively, but at least he'd make sure everything was legal. By noon, the paperwork was ready. I signed the new will in front of witnesses, and Audrey promised to give me a preliminary plan of action for the guardianship case by the end of the week. In the meantime, she said in parting, try to keep in touch with your granddaughter. It's important for her and for our case. I nodded, shook her hand, and left the office feeling that I had taken the first step in protecting Tilly. A small one, but an important one. For the next few days, I didn't see my son or Tilly. I walked to the school each morning, hoping to meet my granddaughter, but she was apparently now being escorted out by adults. I tried calling Trenton, but he wouldn't return my calls. On Thursday, when I returned to the boarding house after another unsuccessful attempt to see Tilly, the landlady said a man was looking for me. Said he was your son, she explained. He left a note. I unfolded the folded piece of paper. Trenton's handwriting, nervous and angular. Dad, we need to talk. Come by tomorrow at 5. Trenton. I spent the next day wondering what to expect from this meeting. Perhaps Trenton had come to his senses, or more likely, was Winnie determined to try to butter me up to win back my financial support. At 5 o'clock, I stood in front of my son's house. There was no Winnie's car in the driveway. Maybe she wasn't home? That would be fortunate. Without her, Trenton might have been more forthcoming. The door was opened by Trenton himself. He looked tired and stressed, but he tried to smile at the sight of me. Hey, Dad, thanks for coming. I nodded silently and walked into the house. The living room was the same as usual, except there was a dish of cookies and a teapot on the coffee table, a clear attempt to create a cozy, homey atmosphere. Where's Tilly? I asked, looking around. Upstairs, doing homework, Trenton answered. I'll call her later. We need to talk first. I sat back in my chair, waiting for him to continue. Trenton fidgeted with his shirt sleeve. Dad, I understand you're upset about what happened at Garrett's birthday party, and I want to apologize. I should have stepped in sooner. Yes, you should have, I agreed, not wanting to make it any easier on him. But you have to understand, Trenton continued, we have a complicated situation. Winnie tries to be a good mother to all the kids, but sometimes she has a hard time coping. And that's why she's taking it out on a 6-year-old? I asked. Making her work like a maid while her own kids have fun? Trenton sighed. She's not perfect, I know, but she tries, and she really cares about Tilly. That's a strange way to show concern. Dad, please. Trenton stepped forward. I talked to Winnie. She admits she's been too strict. She promises to change. And you believe her? I want to believe, he said quietly. For Tilly's sake. For our family. At that moment, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Winnie and Tilly came into the room. Winnie looked flawless as always, with perfect hair and makeup. Tilly was holding onto her hand, but looked tense. Merrick, Winnie gave me a radiant smile. I'm so glad you came. I ignored her and turned to my granddaughter. Hi, Fishy. How are you? Good, Tilly replied quietly, casting a quick glance at Winnie. Tilly would like to tell you something, Winnie purred, nudging the girl forward slightly. Tilly took a step and spoke in obviously memorized sentences. Grandpa, I want to tell you that I love my family. Winnie takes care of me, and I help her because I want to be a good girl. I could see how unnaturally she was holding herself, how she was trying not to stray from the learned text. I understand, Fishy, I said softly. Did you read the book I gave you? Tilly's eyes brightened for a moment. Yes, it's very beautiful. There's a story in it about... Tilly, Winnie interrupted. Why don't you go upstairs and finish your homework? The adults need to talk. Tilly nodded obediently and headed for the stairs. I watched her, noticing that she was now wearing a new dress, obviously bought especially for this meeting. As Tilly disappeared upstairs, Winnie sat down next to Trenton and took his hand, the perfect picture of family togetherness. Merrick, she began in a tone she apparently thought sincere, I want to apologize for what happened. You're right. I was too hard on Tilly. Sometimes I do overreact. Not just sometimes, I said. Yes, she lowered her head obediently. I'm not a perfect mother. but I try. And I really want Tilly to have the best of everything, like shabby clothes and maid duties. Winnie sighed. I've earned that, but believe me, I've already started to make up for it. We bought Tilly new clothes, signed her up for the swimming lessons she'd long wanted, and I've revised the division of household chores. Now all the kids help equally. I looked at her skeptically. What caused this sudden change? Your words, Winnie replied. They made me think. I don't want to be a wicked stepmother from a fairy tale. I want to be a good mother to all my children, including Tilly. And the fact that I cut off financial aid had no bearing on this sudden epiphany. Trenton intervened. Dad, it's not about the money. We can do this without your help. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What about private school for Rosie and Garrett? Tennis lessons? Ballet classes? We'll find a way, Trenton said uncertainly. Winnie got a promotion. And yet here you are, I remarked, trying to convince me that things have changed. Because we want you to be a part of our lives, Winnie said. Tilly misses you, and so does Trenton. I looked at them carefully. They both looked sincere, but there was something fake about the scene, rehearsed. I want to talk to Tilly, I said. Alone. Winnie tensed visibly, but quickly pulled herself together. Sure, she's in her room. Trenton, why don't you show your father how we renovated it? Trenton nodded and led me upstairs. On the way, he talked about how he and Winnie had realized their mistakes, how they'd decided to change things. I listened half-heartedly, noting that the house did look a little different. The walls were covered with children's drawings, including Tilly's, which I hadn't noticed before. Tilly's room had changed too. There were new curtains, a brightly colored bedspread, and a shelf of toys and books. Tilly sat at a small table, leaning over a notebook. Fishy, you have a visitor, Trenton said. Tilly looked up and smiled when she saw me. This time the smile was real. Grandpa. I'll leave you to it, Trenton said and walked out, closing the door. As soon as we were alone, Tilly ran up and hugged me. I missed you so much, she whispered. Why didn't you meet me after school anymore? They wouldn't let me in, Fishy, I stroked her head. But I'm here now. Tell me how you're doing. Just the truth. Tilly pulled back a little and looked at me with serious eyes. Things are different now. Winnie bought me new clothes and signed me up for swimming, and she doesn't yell anymore. So much. And Rosie and Garrett, do they still call you maid? Tilly shook her head. Winnie told them those are bad words and they shouldn't say that. But they still don't play with me. What about chores at home? Do you still have to do more than they do? Tilly hesitated for a moment. I don't. Winnie says it's all fair now, but Rosie and Garrett aren't much help anyway. I nodded, beginning to understand. The outward changes were there, but the essence was still the same. Tilly, would you be happier if you lived with me? I asked bluntly. Tilly's eyes widened. With you? For good? Yes, for good. In my house. And Daddy? Ahatornei, she asked quietly. He could come to visit whenever he wanted, I said. But you'll live with me. Tilly looked embarrassed and excited at the same time. I don't know. I love Daddy, but with you, I'm not afraid with you. Those simple words broke my heart. A child shouldn't have to live in fear in his own home. What scares you, Fishy? I asked softly. Tilly lowered her head. When Winnie gets angry, she grabs me really hard and shakes me and says scary things. What kind of things? That I'm stupid, that my mom was the same way, that I'm ruining their family. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back my anger. Tilly, that's not true. You're a smart, good girl, and your mom was a wonderful person. I know, she whispered. I remember her a little bit. She was always smiling. We talked some more, and I became convinced that, despite the outward changes, the essence of the relationships in this family remained the same. Winnie still saw Tilly as an alien, an inferior part of the family, and Trenton was too weak to protect his daughter. I have to go downstairs, I finally said, but I'll be back soon, and maybe next time we'll go out together. What do you think? I'd like that, Tilly smiled. Maybe to the park? Or an ice cream parlor? Anywhere you want to go, Fish, I hugged her goodbye. Just hang in there for now, okay? Tilly nodded, and I left the room with a heavy heart. Downstairs, Trenton and Winnie were waiting for me impatiently. "So, are you convinced things have changed?" Winnie asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I can see you're trying," I answered evasively. "But real change takes time." "How firmly, Chanan? We're willing to work on it," Trenton assured me. "And we'd like you to be part of the process. Maybe you could take Tilly away for the weekend once in a while." She'd love that. That was exactly what I wanted, but I was slow to agree, sensing a catch. "What about financial aid?" I asked straight up. "You wanted to talk about that too, didn't you?" Trenton and Winnie exchanged glances. "We were hoping you'd reconsider," Trenton said carefully, "especially about the will. Rosie and Garrett are your grandchildren too, even if not by blood." "I'll think about it," I replied. "If I see a real change, long-term, not showy." Winnie pressed her lips together, but quickly put a smile back on her face. "Of course. We realize we have to earn your trust." We agreed that I'd pick up Tilly the following weekend, and I headed for the exit. Trenton went to walk me out, and Winnie stayed in the living room. As I passed the kitchen, I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye and stopped. Tilly was standing at the sink, pouring water for herself. Winnie, thinking no one could see, came up behind her and grabbed her shoulder sharply. "I told you to stay upstairs," she hissed, leaning in close to the girl's ear. "Sacho, don't you dare come downstairs until he's gone." Tilly flinched and the glass slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. "I'm sorry, I was just thirsty," she mumbled fearfully. "You always ruin everything." Winnie squeezed her shoulder tighter, and I saw Tilly wince in pain. "Now clean it up, and don't make a sound." At that moment, Winnie spotted me in the doorway and changed instantly. Her grip loosened, her face softened, her voice became almost affectionate. "Careful, honey. Don't cut yourself. Let me help you." I didn't say anything, just stared at her. Winnie met my gaze, and for a moment fear flashed across her face. She realized what I'd seen. Then she straightened up and looked at me defiantly. "Merrick, are you leaving already?" "Trenton, show your father out." Trenton, who hadn't seen the scene, nodded and led me to the door. "Sorry, Ramon. Will you think about what we talked about?" he asked as he opened the door. "I will," I replied. "You think about it too, son, about what's really important." On the way to the boarding house, I thought about what I had seen. That brief moment confirmed all my suspicions. Winnie was playing a role when she thought I was watching, but as soon as she decided she was out of sight, the mask fell away, revealing her true face. Back in my room, I immediately called Audrey Pembroke. "I need to speed things up," I said as soon as she answered. "The situation is worse than I thought." "What happened?" I could hear the concern in her voice. I told her about what I'd seen today, about the pretend changes at the Trenton house, about the fear in Tilly's eyes. "That's serious," Audrey agreed. "But we still need more substantial evidence for the trial. But we can start taking action now." "How?" "First, I'll expedite the paperwork. Secondly, you can start documenting everything you see. Write down dates, times, what exactly happened. Thirdly, if they're willing to let Tilly spend weekends with you, that's a good thing. We can gradually increase that time as we prepare the case." "What if she gets new injuries during that time?" I asked. "I can't risk her safety. If there are clear signs of violence, we can move faster," Audrey said. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Fear of being exposed might keep your daughter-in-law from going to extremes." I wasn't sure about that, but I had no choice. I had to play this game by the rules, even though every day I delayed seemed dangerous to Tilly. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll take her for the weekend and keep a close eye on things. But if I see one more bruise, I'm not taking her back to that house." "Merrick," Audrey's voice became sterner, "I understand your feelings, but vigilantism will only hurt our case. Let's do this legally." I reluctantly agreed, but I made up my mind that I would never let anyone hurt my granddaughter again, even if I have to go against the law to do so. After all, there was a higher law, the law of conscience, and that was what I was going to follow first. The weekend came, and I was looking forward to seeing Tilly. We agreed that I would pick her up Saturday morning and return her Sunday night. In the intervening days, I had put my house in order. For the first time in a long time, I cleaned thoroughly, airing out the rooms, buying groceries. I paid special attention to Tilly's room. It used to be a guest room, but now I decided to redecorate it especially for my granddaughter. I bought a brightly colored bedspread, A lamp with a lampshade in the form of a starry sky, a few soft toys. On the bookshelf, I put the children's books I used to read to Trenton. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I pulled up to my son's house. Tilly was already waiting for me on the porch with a small backpack over her shoulders. Standing next to her was Trenton, who looked tense and sleep-deprived. "Hey, fishy," I hugged my granddaughter. "Ready for an adventure?" She nodded vigorously, smiling. I grabbed my favorite pajamas and toothbrush. "And the book you gave me." "Great." I took her backpack. "I think we've got enough." Trenton shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, you're bringing her back tomorrow at 6 o'clock, right? She's got school on Monday." "Sure," I nodded. "It'll be fine." "And don't forget, she doesn't like tomatoes," he added. "And cinnamon gives her a rash." "I remember," I smiled. It was nice to see that my son still cared about his daughter, even if it was just for little things. "Where's Winnie?" I asked, noticing that my daughter-in-law hadn't come out to say goodbye. "She's, a little sick," Trenton answered uncertainly. "A cold." I nodded understandingly. Winnie probably just didn't want to see me after I'd caught her in the act with Tilly. "Give her my best wishes for a speedy recovery," I said, not hiding the irony in my voice. Trenton either didn't notice or chose to ignore my tone. "Tilly, behave yourself at Grandpa's." He leaned over and hugged his daughter awkwardly. "Daddy will miss you." "Me too, Daddy," Tilly replied. But I noticed that she wasn't particularly upset about the upcoming separation. We got in the car and drove off. On the way, Tilly talked nonstop about school, about the books she was reading, about the squirrels she'd seen in the park. I listened, occasionally asking questions, and thought about how lively and energetic she was when she felt safe. When we pulled up to my house, Tilly was looking around the neighborhood with curiosity. "Do you live here alone, Grandpa?" "Yes, fishy, ever since Grandma died." "Aren't you lonely?" I wondered. "Sometimes, but I have friends. I have things to do. And now I have you to come visit me." Tilly nodded with a serious look. "I'll come and see you every weekend, if Daddy and Winnie will let me." "Ash, Sonny, I'm sure they will." I winked at her as I opened the door of the house. "Now come on, I'll show you your room." Tilly's eyes widened in surprise when she saw the room prepared for her. "This is all for me? Is it?" "Of course," I nodded. "Every girl should have her own space." She crouched carefully on the edge of the bed, as if she was afraid of messing something up. I've never had such a beautiful room. Those simple words stabbed me in the heart. I remembered Rosie's room, the one I'd glimpsed at the Trenton house with the pink wallpaper, the dollhouse, the plush toys. "I do now," I said, sitting down next to her. "And you know what? We can make it even better. How about we go to the store tomorrow and pick out some more stuff? Maybe a poster for the wall or some new toys." Tilly looked at me hesitantly. "Is that okay?" "Of course you can. It's your room and you can make it whatever you want." She smiled, and there was so much happiness in that smile that it made my heart ache. We spent the afternoon exploring the house and garden. I showed Tilly my collection of old trains that I had collected over the years working on the railroad. She looked at each model with interest and asked questions. Then we went to the garden, where I showed her my modest beds of vegetables and berry bushes. "Can I plant something?" Tilly asked, gingerly touching the raspberry leaves. "What would you like to plant?" she wondered. "A tree. A big, big tree that you could climb." "A tree is serious," I smiled. "It's going to grow for years." "I know," Tilly nodded, "but we'll be able to watch it grow. Every time I visit, it'll be a little taller." I like the idea. The tree is a symbol of permanence, something lasting, something that will be left behind. "You know what? Tomorrow we'll go to the nursery and pick out a sapling. How about that?" Tilly nodded happily, and we continued our tour. In the evening after dinner, which Tilly helped to prepare, not out of compulsion, but with genuine enthusiasm, we sat in the living room. I was reading to her the book I had given her, the one with the beautiful illustrations. Tilly sat against my side, occasionally pointing to a picture she particularly liked. "Grandpa," she said when we had finished reading, "can I stay with you longer? Not just for the weekend?" I put the book aside and looked at her. "Do you like it here?" "Very much," she said seriously. "It's peaceful." I knew what she meant. There was no constant tension in my house, no waiting for a yell or punishment. "You know, I was just thinking about that," I said cautiously. "Maybe you could stay with me a little longer, say a week or two. Do you think your dad would agree? I don't know. Tilly lowered her head. Winnie would probably object. What if I said it was to give them a break, so they can spend time alone? Or with Rosie and Garrett? Tilly thought for a moment, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Maybe. Winnie always says I'm getting in the way of them being a real family. The word stabbed me again. What kind of woman would say that to a child? It's not true, Fish. You're part of their family. But sometimes adults need time to work out their issues. And maybe if you stay with me, they can do that. I didn't believe Trenton and Winnie would really change, but it was a way to convince them to let Tilly go for a longer period of time. Would I be able to go to the same school? Tilly asked practically. Of course you will. I'll drop you off every morning and pick you up after school. Then I want to stay, she said firmly. If Daddy says it's okay. I hugged her, feeling her little body pressed against me trustingly. I'll talk to him tomorrow when I drive you home. The next day, as planned, we drove to the nursery and picked out an apple tree seedling. The salesman said it would bear fruit in 5 or 6 years, and Tilly's eyes lit up at the thought of her own apples. Will we plant it when I get back? She asked as we loaded the seedling into the car. Anyway, we will, I promised, mentally adding, and it will be sooner than you think. After the nursery, we stopped by the toy store where I let Tilly pick out anything she wanted for her room. She was surprisingly modest in her desires, choosing just a teddy bear, a set of colored pencils, and a planetarium projector that showed the stars on the ceiling. In the evening, as we had agreed, I drove Tilly home. Trenton and Winnie met us on the porch. Daddy, Tilly exclaimed as she ran out of the car. I had the best weekend ever. While Tilly was gushing about those 2 days, I gently suggested to Trenton that we talk about having Tilly stay with me longer. To my surprise, Winnie supported the idea, though in her eyes I saw motives other than concern for her stepdaughter. So Tilly stayed with me for 2 weeks. Every day I drove her to school and picked her up after school. We spent our evenings together, reading books, playing games, cooking. Tilly blossomed in front of my eyes. She became more talkative, laughed more often, stopped flinching at sudden sounds. The first Saturday we planted our apple tree. I chose a sunny spot in the far corner of the garden. Someday it will grow sweet apples, I promised as I helped Tilly tamp the soil around the sapling. I'll come and pick them, she said, diligently watering the tree with a watering can. Every year. Maybe you won't have to come, I said cautiously. Maybe you'll live here. Tilly looked at me with serious eyes. For good? If that's what you want, I nodded. What about Dad? He can visit you whenever he wants. Tilly was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, I want to live with you, Grandpa. Here, good. That settled the matter. The next day I contacted Audrey Pembroke and informed her that we were beginning the custody process. Trenton arrived when he learned of my intentions. We talked in the garden while Tilly was at school. You can't do this, Dad, he said, pacing nervously on the path. She's my daughter. A daughter that you allowed to be humiliated and coddled, I replied. You chose Winnie's side over Tilly's. Many times. I love my daughter, Trenton said stubbornly. I know, but that's not enough. You have to protect her, and you don't. We talked for a long time. I could see that Trenton was torn between his love for his daughter and his fear of losing Winnie, between guilt and pride. I'll counter Sue, he finally said. I'll fight for Tilly. That's your right, I nodded. But think about what's best for her, not you. In the end, Trenton left without making up his mind. I knew there was an uphill battle ahead, but I was ready for it. As Tilly's 2-week stay with me was coming to an end, I decided that I would not bring her back to Trenton's house. Not after seeing her blossom away from the toxic atmosphere. Not after the teachers noticed positive changes in her behavior and performance. Not after she herself said she wanted to stay with me. Tilly and I went back to the orchard, to our apple tree. It had already put out its first green leaves. Look, Grandpa, it's growing, Tilly exclaimed excitedly, gently touching a tender leaf. Yes, a fish, I smiled, looking at my granddaughter. And it will grow for many years, and we will grow with it. Tilly nodded seriously, then took my hand. I want to stay with you, Grandpa, for good. You will, I promised. This is our new home, yours and mine. Tilly smiled and snuggled up to me. We were standing next to a young apple tree, a symbol of our new beginning, And I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, together we would make it through. Because there is nothing stronger than the love of a child, the real, protective, unconditional love that was sorely lacking in my son's home, but that I could give Tilly in abundance.